Hello, you guys, and welcome to another day of the Health and Wellness Summit. My name is Courtney Miracle, and today I have Laura with me. Laura, I didn't ask you how to say your last name, so I'm going to have you introduce yourself because I'm going to mess it up for sure. So welcome, but tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Not an easy last name, but it's Dr. Laura DeCesaris. So Laura is fine. Much easier. All my clients call me Dr. Laura. So I am a functional medicine doctor and I'm a health strategist for high performing women. So I work with a lot of women who are entrepreneurs, executives, small business owners, or who are just really looking to take their health to the next level. And I help them come up with their unique strategy for success. I got into functional medicine almost a decade ago because, like so many others, I was not having success in the conventional medical model when it came to my own symptoms, my own issues. I was actually diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease in my early 20s.
Okay.
Finishing college, felt horrible all the time, tired, gaining weight no matter what I did. It just didn't seem right to me.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my doctor about it and he just saying, like, totally normal, you're in college. I'm like, that just doesn't feel right.
Right.
Right. So I actually met a functional medicine practitioner who kind of opened my eyes to this whole other realm of healthcare that I had no idea existed, and the rest is history. So,
That's amazing. I love that. So I know you said you kind of have 4 pillars that you walk people through. So can you give us an overview of what those pillars are?
yeah, a couple pillars. So when I work with clients one-on-one, rather than saying like, okay, maybe you come to me with gut issues, we're just going to focus on gut health. Like, functional medicine is about taking a step back and looking at all of these different areas and how they're working together. So yes, I look at gut health, but we also look at hormone health. We look at stress management, how your body handles stress, your sleep quality. We look at exercise and recovery, not just exercise, but also that recovery piece, brain health and performance as well. So by looking at all of these different pillars and kind of focusing on, all right, well, where are the connections? Which of these pillars need more support? We can create a much stronger foundation overall.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because so many people, we have a program called Shift where it's not the same, but it's getting people to look at the whole picture of
Right.
like, you're not just this one part of who you are. It's like your recovery. So we own a CrossFit gym. I don't know how much you know
Nice.
about it, but people so often they're like, but I want to come every day. I'm like, well, you've got to recover. And if we're not doing the recovery piece, it's interesting when people just want to look at one specific piece. So I love that you incorporate all of that to really help people perform better. So I know today we're going to dive a little bit into the hormones. So kind of walk us through a little bit of that and then what that looks like when you work with clients.
Sure. So a lot of women come to me. Some already know they have hormone issues just based on the way they're thinking, the way they're feeling. Maybe they've seen a bunch of other practitioners who have tried to manage their kind of errant hormones over the years. But something that I like to start with is, okay, well, and if we're talking about a woman here who's not on hormonal birth control, but just has hormonal dysfunction, like, we start talking about labs first, right? And when you're going in for a standard blood draw, it's a big snapshot in time, right? It's very dependent on what time of the cycle you're going in, what time of day you're going in. So like, you may catch things, you may not.
Right.
So the difference between that and more functional testing, I prefer using something called the Dutch test, if you've heard of that. It's an at-home urine test, but it's done over the course of 24 hours at a very specific point in a woman's cycle. So we kind of can predict what should be happening based on when that lab is being taken. And we also see how all those hormones are being metabolized over time, over the course of a 24-hour period, versus just kind of taking that one snapshot in time through labs.
Yeah.
This can give a lot of women who have struggled with hormone issues a bigger picture of what's actually going on. And it serves as a good jumping off point for someone that's had hormonal dysfunction for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. And then beyond that, there's obviously very basic things we go through too. So what's going on in your environment? What's going on in your nutrition? Are you sleeping? What are your stress levels like? All of these things affect our hormones, and all of our hormones affect each other. It's like kind of going with what we were talking before about the bigger picture. It's so much more complex than, oh, your estrogen's high, let's bring it down. Like, we have to look at all these other factors at what contributes to hormones being too high or too low. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I love it. So we talked a little bit about cycles and working with your cycle before we started this interview. And then not very many women know much about their cycle, what's supposed to be happening when, or how you're supposed to work with your body. So can you kind of walk us through maybe what happens in a normal cycle, and then what most of us are probably doing wrong, myself included, to like work against our bodies instead of with our bodies?
Yeah. So basically over the course of a regular cycle, which is generally somewhere 27, 28 days is the average. Some women have slightly shorter, some women have slightly longer, but there's a couple different phases that the body goes through. So kind of the first half of that cycle is something called the follicular phase. It's when we see estrogen levels rising. Women generally feel pretty good during this cycle. And that's going on right up until ovulation, which is somewhere around day 13, 14, or 15. After ovulation, the body goes into something called the luteal phase, which normally would be preparing the body for a pregnancy if an egg was fertilized. If not, what happens is at the end of the luteal phase, the body gets signaling to go shed the uterine lining. We start bleeding, we have our periods, and then go into the next cycle. But a tool that I work with, that I use with a lot of women, is something called cycle syncing. So by learning about these different phases and what's going on in your body metabolically, what's going on in your body from a hormone perspective, what's going on in your body from a stress hormone perspective, you can learn to work with these things, help reduce PMS symptoms, and also help with some of the mood fluctuations and energy fluctuations that we feel at different parts of our cycle. And it's much more about symptoms. It's also about nutrition, how to schedule your workouts, how to even schedule big work events based on the combination of all these different hormonal patterns going on throughout your cycle. So we can kind of break it down to each of those if you want.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So let's start with nutrition, and like different diets, specific diets aside, we're going to talk general principles here. But for that first part of your cycle, the follicular phase, your body is much more insulin sensitive. So what this means is you can better utilize your macronutrients, your carbs, and your fats for your goal. So this is a good time for women to play around with, like, if you're training hard as a CrossFitter, right? Like carb refeeds, doing things to help with muscle gain, really good time for it. Your body is very primed to take those carbohydrates and use them to help grow muscle, versus them being stored as body fat. This is also a really great time in the follicular phase for women to play around with intermittent fasting. So if that's something that you're interested in, your body has a much easier time doing it and kind of tapping into those internal fat stores during the follicular phase. As we move into ovulation, generally most women who have healthy hormones feel really great around ovulation. They're feeling themselves, they feel good, their performance in the gym is great. There can be a little bit of inflammation in some women, so focusing on like some anti-inflammatory foods at this time can be really valuable. Things like salmon, avocados, berries, all of that. But your ovulation when you're working out is also a really great time to go for like a PR if you're a weightlifter. Like try and lift that heavy weight, do your super intense kickboxing class. Really, really good time to try that. And then as we start to shift into the luteal phase, that insulin sensitivity starts to lower. This means we have a harder time kind of taking those carbohydrates and using them for energy. We're a little bit more primed to store body fat. If you think back to what is happening in the luteal phase, it's normally when the body is preparing for a pregnancy, right? Egg just got fertilized. So the messaging is store body fat, store body fat, store body fat. So this is not as great of a time to focus on like big carb refeeds, things like that. It is a good time to just think more balanced, think more like, healthy anti-inflammatory fats, adequate protein. Not a great time for intermittent fasting. So just kind of having a more regular eating window during this time is great as well. Higher fiber, like slower absorption carbs if you are eating them. So versus like white potatoes or white rice, making the switch to, something like lentils, things like that just blunt the blood sugar spikes a little bit more.
Yep.
Yeah. And then in terms of your workouts versus doing super high intensity, depending on the woman, this is a good time to either slow it down a little bit, maybe do more like yoga, hiking, body weight stuff, or utilize weight training workouts that are based more on like fat burning versus the heaviest weight possible. So maybe lightening the weights a little bit, but doing more for reps, a little bit shorter time frame. And then as we kind of head into that premenstrual phase, those couple days before we get our period, anti-inflammatory nutrition is really, really helpful here.
Yeah.
Things that help reduce inflammation because your body is making more inflammatory molecules leading up to the first day of your period. The tendency for a lot of women during this time is to crave sugary processed foods. And part of that is because your metabolism is humming along a little higher. So you're burning a little more calories. But I promise you, if instead of reaching for like the processed sugar foods, you grab like some berries, some avocados, healthy fats, you will feel much better in terms of those PMS symptoms if you get them, because it's all about keeping your blood sugar stable at this point in time.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then we get our period and it starts all over again.
So when you're in like the PMS phase, if we can go back to like weight training, I've heard, and I'm guessing from what you just said is probably true, is that you probably won't feel as strong in that phase as you would the week before.
Usually not. Yeah. And mentally, it's a little harder for a lot of women to kind of push themselves. Like they may, I see a lot of women being hard on themselves. Like, oh man, a week ago I was able to do this. And now I just don't feel that way. And like being a little kind to yourself and realizing what's going on in your body and saying, okay, well, I'm here at the gym. I'm at least lifting some weight.
Right.
It's not as heavy as normal. Like I'm going to feel so much better when I leave. But yeah, those couple days before you get your period, not the time to go for like the heaviest weight you've ever lifted, for sure.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay. So when you work with your clients, like obviously you talked to them about nutrition, what else are you doing to help them start to sync their cycles and not be so frustrated with like why they don't always feel the same all the time?
Yeah. So first step is figure out, are they having a fairly regular cycle, or is there some kind of underlying issue going on? Obviously, if there's an issue going on, we need to do some therapeutic things to help support that. Whether that's doing lab testing, whether that's doing targeted supplementation and nutritional interventions to support one phase or the other, whether that's looking at kind of the intake. So is there any like xenoestrogen toxins coming in all the time that we can clean up a little bit, help reduce their overall load. But then I map it out with each client. We literally map it out. We look at their workouts, we look at their work schedule, and we help to form habits based on each part of their cycle. So maybe that's me coordinating with a trainer if they have one, like, hey, these weeks there's a really great time to do a strength phase. These weeks maybe focus more on like metcons, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll just write it out for them to give to their trainer if they prefer that. Same goes with nutrition. We try and focus on foods to add in at different parts of their cycle. And then we look at their work schedule as well. And we try to schedule like big presentations, launches, that kind of stuff around ovulation if we can. Creative work in the first half of the cycle versus like task-oriented admin work in the second half of the cycle. I think so.
So we're all basically worthless in the second half. Or I'm just kidding. We're not
it sounds that way, but it's like you're so good at like, if you take the really like tough mental work, like take the creative work out, take the super intense weightlifting out for a couple days and focus on like all those other things you have to do in your life. And you can really make it so much easier for yourself and like give yourself a little leeway versus like stressing out about, 2 days before you get your period. And you're like, oh my God, I'm not lifting weight great. And I have this huge event going on at work and I feel like the world is ending. Like if we learn these things, we can just make it much easier on ourselves. But like anything else, it takes some time to learn. It takes some habit forming, but it's one of those things that for the long run can be really, really valuable for busy women.
Yeah. Well, and I love just the awareness around it because I think, it's funny, almost every interview I've done, we always come back to awareness of if we just have this belief that, especially high performing women, I should be productive all the time. I should feel amazing all the time. I should never feel bloated. I should never crave sugar. And then when those things happen, we're like you said, we're super hard on ourselves versus being like, oh, okay, this is going to happen. So I'm going to ask this question and you can tell me what you think about it. So for me, I would wonder, this is stuff going through my head, so I'm going to ask it. So if I knew, okay, I'm going into this phase, do you think sometimes we create more stories then around like, oh, I'm just not going to be strong today? And then we would show up at the gym like, oh, I'm just not strong today. Do you think that happens at all?
Probably. I mean, I, as someone who also weight trains a lot, I know the importance of mentally preparing yourself for certain things, right?
Yeah.
I think a big thing to think about is what's the balance? Like, you can have a great workout and lift heavy weight, but not be going for a PR.
Right.
Versus like, if you are really planning and training for a PR, that's when maybe you should take a look at like, where am I at in my cycle? What's a good time to plan for this? Because it's just going to be easier on yourself. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of strong women out there who can like totally just be like, nope, I'm going to beat my hormones at their own game and I'm going to do this today.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah. So if you have someone who has to, so my niece is an Olympic weightlifter, and like, she has to lift no matter what day, like on her certain cycle. So is there a way to enhance that so that if you have to lift and it's towards the end of your cycle, are there certain things you can do to try to increase strength or try to get your hormones going the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're kind of following like, all right, how is my body utilizing nutrition right now? Because there's plenty of women that lift really heavy weights who have carb dominant diets, and there's plenty who have fat dominant diets and they're still kicking butt, right? Like, no matter what we read about on the internet, we see it happening. But recognizing like, okay, at this point in my cycle, I really thrive on like carbs. I can really handle that. Whereas at this point, I can't handle them as well, and kind of creating your peri-workout nutrition for that. So like, maybe she is in the second half of her cycle where that insulin sensitivity drops a little bit, but she has to perform. This is her thing, right? So we can save the carbs for right around that workout, peri-workout, because she's going to be using them, right? And we can also make sure that we're maybe like helping support with very targeted supplements. Like, we know a lot of supplements out there that help drive carbohydrates into muscle tissue, like nutrient partitioning supplements. So you can also make use of those. And those aren't things that are illegal in the sports world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too with stuff like that, because she's had times where she has to diet down to get to the weight, and then it's like we have 24 hours to try to get all the carbs back in her body. So it's really interesting, but it's cool when you start to understand how to work with your body. So for non-weightlifters, let's go back to maybe some of the brain side. Can you talk about what's going on maybe the brain side with our hormones and our cycles? Is that also affected?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what I touched on before when I was talking about planning your work productivity based on your cycle. So in that follicular phase, that kind of estrogen dominant phase, it is a really great time for creative work. Like, there is a ton of estrogen receptors on our brain. And that's a great time early on to do like your content planning, your big ideas, your creating your visions for whether that's product launches or summits or whatever that is, like much bigger picture, big dreaming work. As you move into ovulation, kind of like I said before, a lot of women feel really good then. And it's a very primal thing. Like, other people pick that up, right?
Yeah.
It's not just you that notices it, it's everyone else. So this is a really great time. Like, if you're getting up on stage, big presentations, the start of a launch, things that are stressful, asking for a raise at work. These are all really good things to plan around your ovulation if you can.
Yeah.
And then as we move into that second part of your cycle, some women can keep doing all this. It's not going to affect them as much, but a lot of women find that creative streak is not as great in that second part of their cycle. But what they are
totally relate to that. I'm thinking about, like, I go through these phases where I'm super creative, and then a week later I'm like, I got nothing. I have nothing to talk about, nothing to write about. And as I think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally fits.
Yeah, it's not there. So instead of beating ourselves up and being like, oh man, I really need to be on right now, like, okay, what about all the other parts of our work and business? Like, all those admin tasks we have to do, checking off the boxes, like doing email funnels, like things that are a little more tedious but don't quite require the big creative juices. Really good time to catch up on all that, your accounting, your bookkeeping, all of those type of things.
So say that you have someone who has a cycle that's a little bit shorter or a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to track, like, do you always ovulate in the middle of your cycle? Is that a true thing or not really?
For most women, if it's a regular cycle, yeah, somewhere in that kind of 13 to 15 day range. But a lot of women's hormones are a little bit off, and it can be happening a little earlier or a little later. So there's a couple different ways to do this. Like obviously, there's over-the-counter ovulation kit tests that you can do. There's a ton of apps out there now for tracking and like tracking symptoms too.
Yeah.
Like My Cycles, Flow app. There's a new one coming out called Wild Women AI.
Okay.
That are very much geared towards tracking symptoms and kind of cueing women into like, oh, see these patterns that are happening, like your body temperature rises a little bit, there's an increase in cervical mucus, like you're ovulating here, and kind of
Right.
teaching them to recognize those signs a little bit. So some of it is just kind of learning what is actually happening physiologically during ovulation and tracking accordingly to figure out where it happens for you.
Yeah, nice. That's cool. This is also interesting. And I feel like I know a lot about my body. And we start talking about this, I'm like, I know nothing. Apparently I need to do I need to go like look at more of your stuff. So this is so cool. Anything else that you want to share as far as cycle syncing or anything else that you think would be really important for women to know, or the men that are supporting these women? That's also I think if we could all cue our husbands into like, hey, this is what's happening, and this is like why I feel like this. I think that would help relationships too.
It definitely can be valuable, right? Because like, I don't know, maybe you've experienced this. I definitely have in the past when my hormones are a little awry. Is like, there's some days in the month that you're just like, wow, I am a different human. Like, I know it's me, but someone else is taking over for a little bit. It doesn't have to be that way if we can learn a little bit more about our cycles and what we can do to support it nutritionally and from a lifestyle perspective. And like for guys too, recognizing that in your partner, and instead of being like, wow, it's your time of the month, being like, okay, like how can I help support her while she's like figuring out how to feel good, because I want her to feel good. So
Right.
a little bit of kindness and sympathy goes a long way.
I don't want to just avoid her. So I'll tell you this funny story. I'm pretty like, my hormones are fairly consistent, except when I was pregnant. And like
Yeah.
literally the first trimester of my first pregnancy, I would be like yelling at my husband, and I'm not like, that's not my personality. And I would be like yelling at him for some really silly thing. And like the logical me was like watching the crazy me going, what are you doing? Like 20 minutes later, I'd be like, I don't know what that was. I'm really sorry. And he just got to the point where we just laugh. And I was like, okay, hormones are real. I did not realize how like actually crazy they can make you. It was so funny. He was just like, it's okay, honey, right? Like you're pregnant. And then they like calmed down again. But that was like my first like ever where I could really see this like other side of me. And you're like, what's happening? So yeah, if that happened all the time, I would definitely need a little more support.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all this. This is so interesting. So tell the viewers kind of what you offer, how they can get in touch with you, if they want to dive deeper into any of this stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, just under my name, Dr. Laura DeCesaris. My website is drlauradecesaris.com. I can drop it in the comments after we post this interview if that's easiest. And in terms of options for working with me, I do work with a limited number of women at a time, one-on-one. And then I also have a 45-day group mini mastermind for women who are looking to learn all of these functional medicine tools like cycle syncing, and also kind of going through each of those pillars to learn a strategy for themselves. It's called Power 45. Our next round is beginning in early May. And you can find registration links for that on my social media as well.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much. This is super, super fun. You guys reach out to Laura. I know if you're female and you're a high achiever, you're probably watching this. And I think there's so much we can all learn on how to be kinder to ourselves and work with our bodies and instead of against them. So Laura, appreciate it so much. And the rest of you, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you.